The Mauser sits at a 40-degree angle against stone, its Zeiss scope catching the last thin light bleeding through a shell hole in the bell tower wall. Dust coats the leather cheekpiece. A half-box of Patronen SME brass sits unopened beside the stock, 7 rounds still in their paper wrapper. The rifle has not moved in 3 days. It will not move again. Below and across what had been Rue de Siam, there is nothing. A gap in the world where a 4-story building stood until 0917 on the morning of September 9th, 1944. The rubble pile is still smoking in places. Somewhere under it, a German Feldwebel named Horst Brenner had been spotting for a sniper team on the 3rd floor. The sniper himself, Obergefreiter Wilhelm Fassbender, Fallschirmjäger Regiment 6, Iron Cross 2nd Class, 11 confirmed kills in Normandy, had been watching from this bell tower when the American shell arrived. Not shells, shell, singular. Fassbender had taken his 4th shot of the morning at 0912. An American officer, stupid enough to stand in a doorway consulting a map. Clean hit through the upper chest. The man dropped. Standard work. Fassbender had worked the bolt, ejected the casing, and begun scanning for the next target. 5 minutes later, 75 millimeters of high explosive traveling at 470 meters per second struck the building across the street at the precise window Brenner had been using. Not the building, not the floor. The window. The structure folded inward, like paper in a fire. Fassbender did not fire again that day. The next morning, he relocated to a factory roof 600 meters east, took 1 shot, missed. The distance was difficult, the wind unpredictable. 90 seconds later, a shell came through the corrugated iron roofing 8 meters to his left. He was already moving when the 2nd round landed where he had been lying. He stopped shooting. Left the Mauser where it sat, walked down 6 flights of stairs, and told his lieutenant that he was requesting reassignment to a rifle platoon. The lieutenant asked if he was wounded. Fassbender said no. The lieutenant asked if he was a coward. Fassbender said nothing. What could he say? The Americans were doing something impossible, locating his firing position from over a kilometer away and delivering precision artillery within 2 minutes of his shot. Every sniper who had opened fire in the past 72 hours was either dead or had stopped shooting. This is what German soldiers at Brest discovered in September 1944. That the Americans had solved the problem of counter-sniper fire in a way no army in history had managed. Not through counter-snipers of their own, not through area suppression, through artillery so fast and accurate that the act of pulling a trigger became an act of suicide. The records from Brest are fragmented, scattered across after-action reports and intelligence summaries that nobody thought to collate for decades. But if you want the real story of what broke German snipers at Brest, not the simplified version, not the one that skips the mechanics, hit subscribe. If you know something about this engagement that the archives missed, drop it in the comments. And if this channel matters to you, the like button helps more than you think. What Fassbender and every other German marksman at Brest ran into wasn't luck. It wasn't coincidence. It was a system, a network of forward observers, radio links, pre-plotted coordinates, and gun crews who had drilled the sequence until it took less time to deliver a shell than it took a sniper to change positions. The Germans had snipers too, good ones. Fallschirmjäger were among the best trained troops in the Wehrmacht, but training doesn't help when the rules have changed. A captured German NCO from the Brest garrison later told his interrogators that attempting to engage American infantry was, and this is his word, not mine, sinlos, pointless, not because the Americans were bulletproof, because the artillery response was so certain, so fast, that the exchange rate made no sense. Kill one American, die yourself. Kill two, still die yourself. By September 12th, organized sniper activity in the Brest perimeter had effectively ceased. To understand why, we have to go back to Tunisia. The smell hit American soldiers before they saw the city. Burning oil storage tanks sent columns of black smoke visible from 30 kilometers out, and the wind carried that petroleum stink mixed with something sweeter and worse, decomposition. Brest had been under siege since August 7th, and by the time the 29th Infantry Division pushed into the outer suburbs, the corpses of French civilians and German stragglers had been cooking in late summer heat for weeks. The streets were canyons of rubble. Every intact window was a potential firing port. Every church steeple commanded a killing ground measured in city blocks. General Lieutenant Hermann Bernhard Ramke had 38,000 men inside the perimeter, not rear echelon clerks and recovering wounded, Fallschirmjäger, 2nd Parachute Division. These were the men who had taken Crete in 1941, who had held Cassino against everything the Allies threw at them for 4 months. Ramke himself was 60 years old and had personally led bayonet charges in North Africa. He had been ordered to hold Brest until relieved. He had no intention of being relieved. His mission was to tie down as many American divisions as possible for as long as possible, bleeding them in the rubble while the Wehrmacht consolidated defenses elsewhere. A fortress city garrisoned by fanatics with nothing to lose. The terrain could not have been better designed for defense if German engineers had built it from scratch. Brest's old town was a maze of narrow streets dominated by stone buildings, 3 and 4 stories tall, medieval construction that shrugged off anything short of a direct hit from heavy artillery. The port facilities added another layer: cranes, warehouses, concrete submarine pens with walls 4 meters thick. And everywhere, the rubble from Allied bombing created elevated positions with natural cover. A sniper could set up in a collapsed apartment block, take his shot, and disappear into a dozen different rat runs before anyone pinpointed the muzzle flash. The first 3 days of serious urban fighting cost the 29th Division 162 killed and over 600 wounded. A significant portion of those casualties came from single-aimed shots, not machine gun fire, not mortars, not the random lottery of artillery. Precision fire from men who knew exactly what they were doing. German doctrine had always emphasized marksmanship. Fallschirmjäger took it further, treating the rifle as a primary instrument of psychological warfare. One shot, one American NCO down, and suddenly an entire platoon was pinned behind cover, afraid to move, while German mortars registered on their position. The snipers were not just killing men. They were freezing units in place, disrupting command, making every advance a crawl through fear. An after-action report from the 175th Infantry Regiment describes the situation with unusual candor. The battalion commander wrote that his men had become reluctant to expose themselves for any purpose, that junior leaders were being specifically targeted, and that the resulting paralysis was degrading combat effectiveness beyond the actual casualty count. He requested additional counter-sniper assets. What he got instead was a forward observer team from the division artillery. The Germans had every advantage those first 72 hours. Superior defensive positions and elite troops with iron morale. a city that channeled attackers into kill zones while offering defenders infinite escape routes. Wehrmacht's snipers owned the vertical dimension. They could see the Americans. The Americans could not see them. The exchange rate was running maybe 10-1 in Germany's favor for sniper engagements. By any conventional calculation, this should have continued. Urban warfare historically favors the defender by factors of 3 or 4-1, and Brest was urban warfare at its most brutal. What Wehrmacht did not know, what his snipers did not know, was that the American artillery system had been rebuilt from the ground up after the disasters of Kasserine Pass. The army that landed in North Africa in 1942 could not have done what the army at Brest did in 1944. Doctrine had changed. So had training, communications equipment, everything. Most importantly, the philosophy was different. American artillery was no longer a supporting arm that showed up when requested and fired, we're told. It had become something else entirely. A reactive nervous system that could identify a threat and eliminate it faster than the human being creating that threat could relocate. The Fallschirmjäger at Brest were about to discover what that meant. 15%. That was the casualty rate for Company K, 175th Infantry Regiment, between September 8th and September 10th. 2 days of fighting in a sector measuring roughly 400 meters by 600 meters. 47 men dead or wounded out of approximately 180 effective strength. Of those 47 casualties, intelligence officers later estimated that between 12 and 16 came from precision rifle fire. Aimed shots from elevated positions by men who knew their craft, not machine guns or artillery fragments or grenades. Run those numbers across a division front, and the arithmetic gets ugly fast. The 29th Infantry Division had 3 infantry regiments. Each regiment had 3 battalions. Each battalion had 3 rifle companies, plus a headquarters company and weapons company. That's 27 rifle companies doing the actual house-to-house work at Brest, plus supporting elements. If every company took losses comparable to Company K's, the division would be combat ineffective within 2 weeks. Not from mass German counterattacks, not from the fortress guns, but from patient men with scoped rifles picking off leaders and specialists one shot at a time. The medics noticed first. Aid station logs from the first week show a disproportionate number of head and upper chest wounds, the signature of aimed fire rather than suppressive fire. Machine guns and mortars produce scattered wound patterns across the body. Snipers shoot for killing shots. A company surgeon attached to the 115th Infantry later wrote that he could tell from the wound location alone whether a man had been hit by a sniper or by random fire. The snipers, he noted, rarely sent us patients who survived the trip to the aid station. Company commanders started losing lieutenants faster than replacements could arrive. A platoon leader in urban combat has to expose himself constantly, pointing, directing, moving between positions to maintain control. The Germans knew this. Their snipers had standing instructions to prioritize officers and NCOs, and the Americans were making it easy. Rank insignia, map cases, binoculars, the simple body language of command, all of it marked targets. By September 9th, some platoons in the 29th were being led by staff sergeants because every lieutenant assigned to them had been killed or wounded. The traditional response to snipers was counter-snipers. Find a man who shoots better than the enemy, give him a scope, and let them duel. The problem at Brest was scale. American sniper training in 1944 was adequate but not extensive. The Army had never prioritized individual marksmanship the way the Germans did. A division might have a handful of men designated as snipers, not the dozens needed to match Ramke's Fallschirmjäger across a city-sized battlefield. And even if the Americans had enough trained marksmen, urban counter-sniper work takes time. Finding a concealed shooter in a landscape of broken buildings is detective work. Studying angles, waiting for muzzle flash, cross-referencing reports from different positions, then waiting some more. That could take hours. Meanwhile, the German changed positions and started killing again. The numbers did not work. Training enough counter-snipers to address the immediate problem was impossible. There was no time. Suppressing every building with machine gun fire would consume astronomical amounts of ammunition for doubtful effect, and advancing slowly enough to locate every firing position meant casualties accumulating to unacceptable levels before reaching the objective. The mathematics of Brest demanded a solution that scaled, applicable across an entire division front simultaneously, removing individual skill from the equation. Firepower scales. Systematic procedure removes individual skill requirements. The American artillery community had spent 2 years since Kasserine perfecting exactly that, a method of turning observers, radios, fire direction centers, and gun batteries into a single reactive organism, capable of putting steel on target faster than any other army in history. The men who designed that system had not been thinking about snipers specifically. They had been thinking about German tanks emerging from tree lines, about enemy artillery opening fire from reverse slopes, about any threat that appeared suddenly and needed to die quickly. But the mechanics were identical. Identify the threat, transmit the location, calculate the firing solution, deliver the round. The sniper problem at Brest was just another input for a machine that had been built to solve exactly this category of problem. Hauptmann Klaus Vogler trained his snipers the way the Wehrmacht had always trained its snipers, as craftsmen, individual artisans of death who spent months learning to read wind, estimate range, control their breathing, disappear into terrain. A good German sniper was a finished product, a weapon system unto himself, capable of operating independently for days at a time. Vogler had 6 such men under his command at Brest. By September 11th, 2 were dead, and the other 4 had stopped firing. The American approach looked nothing like this. It looked, frankly, like cheating. In practice, a rifle squad advances down a street in Brest. The point man goes down. Single shot, upper body, clearly aimed fire from an elevated position to the northeast. The squad takes cover, standard so far. But attached to that squad, or within radio range of the platoon sergeant, is a forward observer, usually a lieutenant or a sergeant from the division artillery, sometimes just an infantryman who has been given basic training on calling fire missions. That observer has a radio. He has a map with a grid overlay that matches the map at the fire direction center 2 kilometers behind the lines. And he has a very specific job. The observer does not need to see the sniper. He needs to identify the building. He notes the cross streets, estimates the floor, keys his radio, and transmits a fire mission in a standardized format that takes maybe 15 seconds to speak. At the fire direction center, a tent or a commandeered basement full of men with plotting boards and slide rules, the mission arrives. A computer calculates the deflection and elevation for the battery. Not a computer in the modern sense, A soldier whose job title was literally computer, trained to convert grid coordinates into firing data using tables and arithmetic. The whole process from radio transmission to firing solution takes under a minute. Then, the guns fire. The Germans understood artillery. They had excellent artillery of their own. The Wehrmacht's gunners were professionals who had been refining their craft since 1939. What they did not understand was the speed. German doctrine treated artillery as a deliberate weapon. You planned fires in advance, registered them on likely avenues of approach, coordinated with infantry commanders through formal channels. Responsive fire existed, but it was measured in tens of minutes, not tens of seconds. The idea of using artillery against a single rifleman in a window would have struck most German officers as absurd. A waste of ammunition, a misuse of assets. The Americans did not care about the ammunition. They had more. The industrial disparity had become tactical. A German artillery battery in 1944 operated under constant shell rationing. Every round fired had to be justified. Conservation was doctrine. An American battery at Brest had no such constraints. If a forward observer called for fire on a building because a sniper might be in it, the battery fired. If the observer wanted a second building hit for good measure, the battery fired again. The marginal cost of additional shells approached zero because the supply trucks kept arriving from the beaches, an endless conveyor belt of ammunition that no German logistics officer could have imagined. The FMS reports compiled after the war include testimony from German artillery officers who simply could not believe the American expenditure rates. One colonel from the Brest garrison estimated that the Americans fired more shells in a single week of the siege than his own batteries had fired in the previous 3 months of combat. Verschwenderisch, wasteful, was the word he used. But waste implies inefficiency. There was nothing inefficient about what the Americans were doing. They had converted a problem of individual skill into a problem of system throughput. A German sniper was a precision instrument requiring years to manufacture. An American forward observer could be trained in weeks. The observer did not need to outshoot the sniper. He needed to identify a grid square and speak clearly into a radio. The guns did the rest. The sniper's entire tactical model depended on asymmetry, one hidden shooter imposing disproportionate costs on an exposed enemy. The American artillery system inverted that asymmetry. Now the sniper was the one paying disproportionate costs. One shot, one shell in reply. Sometimes several shells. The building comes down whether you're still in it or not. The helmet weighs 2 pounds 6 ounces. Standard M1 steel pot, olive drab, with a small hole drilled through the crown, where a rifle bullet punched clean through sometime in September 1944. The hole is slightly off-center, about 2 inches left of the midline. A shot that would have killed the wearer instantly if anyone had been wearing it. Nobody was. The helmet was mounted on a broomstick handle and raised slowly above a windowsill on Rue de Siam, while 3 Americans with binoculars watched from positions 70 meters apart. The Germans had perfected the sniper as a psychological weapon. The Americans answered by turning psychology back against them. The technique was simple enough that any rifleman could execute it. You took a helmet, yours, a dead man's, whatever was available, and you fixed it to something that let you raise it into view while keeping your actual body behind cover. A stick, a rifle, a piece of rebar. The helmet went up slowly, mimicking the cautious movement of a soldier peeking over an obstacle. If a German sniper was watching that sector, the temptation to take the shot was nearly irresistible. One bullet, one confirmed kill, mission accomplished. Except the kill was imaginary, and the bullet was very real. The shot revealed the position, not precisely. A single observer might identify the general direction from muzzle flash or sound, but that still left dozens of possible windows in a city block. The solution was triangulation. 3 observation posts spread across the American front, each manned by soldiers with binoculars and synchronized watches. When the decoy drew fire, all 3 teams noted the time and the bearing to the sound or flash. Those bearings, plotted on a map, intersected at a point. The point was a building, usually a specific floor, sometimes a specific window. The records describing this system survive mostly by accident. A signals officer named Lieutenant Harold Brennan kept a personal notebook alongside his official logs, against regulations technically, documenting the fire missions his team processed during the Brest siege. The notebook ended up in his daughter's attic in Scranton until 1992, when she donated it to the Army Heritage Center during a local history drive. Most of what we know about the triangulation procedures comes from Brennan's sketches and margin notes. Anyway, the math worked like this. Sound travels at roughly 340 meters per second at sea level. A rifle shot heard by 3 observers at slightly different times, fractions of a second apart, produces time delays that correspond to distance differentials. Observer A hears the shot, marks the time. Observer B, 50 meters to the left, hears it a tenth of a second later. Observer C, 70 meters to the right of A, hears it 2/10 of a second after that. The delays, combined with compass bearings, give you a fix accurate to within about 15 meters under ideal conditions. Urban acoustics complicated matters. Echoes off stone walls, sound channeling down streets, but even a rough fix narrowed the target to 1 or 2 buildings. 1 or 2 buildings was enough. The forward observer attached to the triangulation team did not need a perfect location. He needed a grid square and a reasonable estimate. The 105 millimeter howitzer shells that followed did not require pinpoint accuracy because they were not trying to hit a man. They were trying to collapse a structure. A volley of 4 rounds into a 3-story building would bring down interior walls, blow out floors, fill the space with fragments and debris. The sniper might survive if he was already moving. If he had stayed in position for a second shot, standard German doctrine, which called for confirming kills, he was buried or shredded. The helmet-on-stick trick worked because it exploited German training. Fallschirmjäger snipers were taught to prioritize targets of opportunity, to never pass up a clean shot at an exposed enemy. That discipline, which had served them well for years, became a liability at Brest. Every shot taken at a decoy was a shot that revealed position. Every revealed position became an artillery target. The mathematics had inverted completely. By September 10th, German snipers in the central districts had started recognizing the pattern. Helmets that moved too slowly. Observation posts that seemed to be watching nothing. The Americans were not just enduring sniper fire anymore. They were farming it. The 75 millimeter round punches through the second-floor window at 11:42 a.m. on September 11th, and the building seems to inhale before it exhales a column of dust and pulverized masonry into Rue Jean Jaurès. Sergeant Werner Hoffman is 3 blocks away when he hears it. Not the crack of a rifle, not the thump of a mortar, but the flat, authoritative bark of a tank gun, firing at point-blank range into a structure where, 20 seconds earlier, Gefreiter Emil Baumann had been setting up his Mauser. The Shermans had arrived. Tank doctrine in 1944 did not include using main guns as sniper suppression. Tanks were for armor, for fortifications, for massed infantry in the open. A 75mm high-explosive round cost the Army approximately $18 in 1944 currency, roughly $250 adjusted for inflation, though that comparison obscures more than it reveals. The round itself was cheap. The tank was not. The crew was not. Risking a $33,000 vehicle and 5 trained men to eliminate 1 rifleman should have been absurd. The infantry did not care about should. What they cared about was this. A replacement rifleman cost the Army approximately $15,000 to recruit, train, transport across the Atlantic, and deliver to his unit in France. An experienced squad leader represented closer to $40,000 in accumulated investment. A platoon lieutenant, with his specialized training and officer candidate school, approached $60,000. These numbers come from a 1946 War Department study on personnel costs, dry accounting that becomes less dry when you realize what it meant in practice. Every sniper kill cost the American war effort tens of thousands of dollars in human capital. An $18 shell started looking economical. The tankers figured this out faster than the brass. By September 10th, Sherman crews in the Brest perimeter had developed their own informal doctrine. When infantry reported sniper fire from a building, the nearest tank would roll forward, depress its gun to minimum elevation, and put 1 round through the window, sometimes 2. The concussion alone was often enough. A 75mm HE shell detonating inside a confined space creates overpressure that ruptures eardrums, collapses lungs, turns internal organs to jelly. The sniper did not need to be hit directly. He needed to be in the room. The sound was distinctive. Veterans who fought at Brest describe it differently than normal artillery. Closer, flatter, more personal. A howitzer shell arrives from above, preceded by a whistle or a rush of displaced air. A tank round comes straight at you, supersonic, no warning. One moment the building is intact. The next moment, there is a hole where a wall used to be, and everything inside has been rearranged by physics. The bazooka teams went further. A 2.36-inch rocket launcher could be carried by 2 men into positions no tank could reach. Upper floors, rubble piles, narrow alleys. The shaped charge was designed for armor penetration, not demolition, but it worked well enough against masonry. Bazooka teams started accompanying rifle squads, specifically as sniper suppression, ready to put a rocket through any window that produced hostile fire. The quartermaster records from Brest show ammunition expenditure that would have been unthinkable in any other army. The 8th Infantry Division alone fired over 12,000 rounds of 75mm ammunition during the siege. Tank guns, not artillery. That works out to roughly 400 rounds per day. Most of those rounds were not fired at German tanks. The Germans had almost no armor left at Brest. The rounds went into buildings, into windows, into any structure that might conceal a man with a rifle. The escalation had a certain mad logic to it. The Germans had built their sniper doctrine around economy. 1 bullet, 1 kill, maximum disruption for minimum expenditure. The Americans answered with anti-economy. One sniper shot meant a tank shell in reply, or a bazooka rocket, or a mortar concentration that dropped 30 rounds into a 50-meter radius. The exchange rate was laughable, but the Americans could afford laughable exchange rates. They had the shells, they had the tanks, they had the industrial base that could replace both faster than the Germans, could train a new sniper. By September 12th, Hoffman had stopped assigning his remaining marksmen to forward positions. The calculus had flipped. A trained Fallschirmjäger sniper was now worth more alive and silent than dead, with one American casualty to his credit. 0743, September 13th, 1944. Obergefreiter Hans Kessler lies prone in a third-floor apartment overlooking the intersection of Rue de Lyon and Rue Traverse, his Karabiner 98, with its 4-power Zeiss resting on a folded blanket across the windowsill. The window itself is gone, blown out days ago by a stray mortar round, and he has positioned himself 2 meters back from the opening, deep enough in shadow that his scope will not catch the morning light. He has been in this position since 0400. He has watched the Americans set up a casualty collection point in the street below. Stretcher bearers, a jeep with a red cross on its hood, 2 medics working on a soldier whose leg is wrapped in bloody gauze. The wounded man is maybe 80 meters away. The medics are closer. Clean shots, all of them. Center mass at a range where the bullet would arrive before the sound. Kessler does not fire. He does not fire because he watched what happened to Feldwebel Gruning 2 days earlier. Gruning had taken a shot at an American officer, hit him too, dropped him in the middle of a street crossing, and then done exactly what doctrine prescribed. He stayed in position for 30 seconds to confirm the kill, then began his displacement to a secondary hide. He made it approximately 15 meters. The building he had just left took 4 direct hits from what Kessler later learned was a 105 millimeter battery firing from somewhere near the old rail yard. The shells arrived so fast they sounded like a single continuous explosion. Gruning was not in the building anymore, but the concussion knocked him off his feet, and the dust cloud was still rising when a Sherman came around the corner and put a round into the secondary position, the one Gruning was crawling toward. The Americans had mapped both hides. They had been waiting. Gruning survived technically. He was still alive when the medics found him, though missing most of his right arm and unable to hear anything from the overpressure damage. The last Kessler heard, he was in a field hospital somewhere behind the American lines, a prisoner who would never hold a rifle again. The intersection below is perfect. The medics are stationary, focused on their work, completely exposed. An American lieutenant has just arrived in a second jeep and is standing next to the hood, looking at a map. 4 confirmed kills, maybe 5, in under 10 seconds if Kessler works the bolt fast enough. He can feel the old training pulling at him, the target acquisition reflex that years of practice had burned into his nervous system. Take the shot, take the shot. But the training had been built for a different war, a war where a sniper could fire and displace and survive to fire again. That war was over. This war had new rules, and the new rules said that the first shot was also the last shot, because the Americans did not hunt snipers anymore. They simply erased the terrain. One muzzle flash, and the building comes down, not the room. The building. They had the ammunition to flatten a city block to kill one man, and they would do it, had done it, were doing it right now somewhere to the north, where Kessler could hear the steady crump of tank guns methodically working through the district where Jaeger's team had been operating. Jaeger stopped reporting yesterday. The FMS interviews conducted after the surrender include a passage from a Fallschirmjäger sergeant, name redacted in the declassified version, who described the psychology of those final days in terms that read almost like a clinical diagnosis. "We had become afraid of our own weapons," he said. "To fire was to die. So we did not fire." The quote appears in a 1946 intelligence summary compiled by the Historical Division, one of hundreds of similar documents that tried to explain why elite German units had stopped fighting effectively even when they still had ammunition and men. The answer was simpler than the analysts wanted it to be. The cost-benefit calculation had inverted. A sniper who took a shot was dead. A sniper who held his fire might surrender, slip away in the confusion of the final collapse, live. Kessler watches the American officer fold his map and climb back into his jeep. The medics load the wounded soldier onto a stretcher. The convoy pulls away. The intersection is empty. His finger never touches the trigger. "We were the best marksmen in the Wehrmacht. It did not matter." The words belong to Oberleutnant Friedrich Detmer, recorded in a 1946 interview at Fort Hunt, Virginia, one of the P.O. Box 1142 interrogations that remained classified until 2006. Detmer had commanded a Fallschirmjäger sniper section at Brest. He survived the siege, surrendered with Rommela's staff on September 19th, and spent the next 18 months answering questions for American intelligence officers who wanted to understand what had happened inside the perimeter. His testimony runs to 47 pages. Most of it covers tactical details, positions, equipment, communications. But near the end, the interviewer asked a broader question. What had he learned about fighting Americans? Detmer's answer fills 3 paragraphs in the transcript. The key passage reads, "Your artillery was not better than ours. Your tanks were not better than ours. Your infantry, I will be honest, was not as well trained as ours. But you had so much of everything that it did not matter. We could kill 10 of your men, and you would send 20 more. We could destroy a tank, and 2 more would appear. We could hold a position for a day, and your shells would erase it on the second day. This is not war as we understood it. This is manufacturing." Manufacturing. The word appears in multiple FMS documents from Brest veterans, always with the same connotation. Something mechanical, industrial, inhuman. The Americans had turned combat into a production problem. Inputs and outputs. A sniper position was an input. A building's worth of high explosive was the output. The process required no skill, no tactics, no individual excellence. It required only the capacity to deliver more destruction than the enemy could absorb. The admission cost Detmer something. You can hear it in the transcript's careful phrasing, the qualifications and deflections that surround the core concession. German training was superior, the equipment comparable, the discipline greater. All true, probably, all irrelevant. The Fallschirmjäger had been the best light infantry in Europe, and they had been ground into rubble by a force that did not need to be better. It only needed to be bigger. Feldwebel Otto Brennicke's testimony takes a different angle. Brennicke had been a sniper instructor before the war, responsible for training the men who would later deploy to Crete, to North Africa, to the Eastern Front. His students had killed hundreds of Allied soldiers, maybe thousands. At Brest, he watched his doctrine collapse in real time. "The Americans did not fight us," Brennicke told his interrogators. "They fought our positions. We were incidental. The distinction matters. Traditional sniper doctrine assumed that the sniper was the target, that the enemy would try to locate and eliminate the individual shooter through counter-sniper tactics, observation, patience. The Americans at Brest had abandoned that assumption entirely. They did not care where the sniper was hiding within a building. They cared which building. The sniper as an individual, with his years of training and his precisely calibrated rifle, had become irrelevant. He was just a trigger for the demolition sequence. Brennecke survived because he stopped shooting on September 9th, 4 days into the siege. He spent the remaining 10 days moving between defensive positions with his rifle slung, never once looking through his scope at an American target. The rifle that had been his identity and his craft, he carried it like a weight he could not put down but refused to use. The final testimony comes from Wehrmacht himself, extracted during a post-war interview that the Historical Division conducted in 1947. Wehrmacht was not a reflective man. He had been a Nazi true believer, unrepentant even in captivity, and his statements are colored by ideology and self-justification. But on the question of American firepower, even he could not dissemble. "They buried us," he said, "not with soldiers, with shells." The quote lacks context in the original document. The interviewer's question is redacted, and the surrounding discussion has been excised for reasons the declassification notes do not explain, but the words stand alone well enough. The Fallschirmjäger had been buried. No one had outfought them, or outmaneuvered them, or beaten them in any contest of military skill. Buried, under the weight of an industrial economy that could afford to spend a building's worth of ammunition on a single rifleman and never notice the expense. What did the Americans learn from Brest? Almost nothing. That's the cosmic joke buried in the after-action reports. The 8th Infantry Division filed its summary on October 3, 1944, 2 weeks after Wehrmacht's surrender. The document runs to 68 pages. Sniper countermeasures occupy approximately 3 paragraphs, buried in a section on urban combat techniques between a discussion of demolition charges and a note about the inadequacy of existing maps. The counter-sniper system that had psychologically broken an elite parachute division, the helmet decoys, the pre-registered artillery, the tank guns firing into windows, the entire improvised doctrine of material annihilation, gets treated as a minor tactical footnote, standard procedure, nothing special. The Americans did not learn from Brest because they had nothing to learn. They had simply done what they always did: identify the problem, solve it. The fact that the problem happened to be German snipers rather than German tanks or German fortifications or German supply lines did not change the fundamental approach. Shells, firepower, industrial output, all of it directed at whatever stood in the way. The Fallschirmjäger snipers had collided with a system, not a tactic, and the system did not care what it was grinding up this week. The Germans learned. Oh, they learned. 23 years later, in 1967, a team of Bundeswehr officers traveled to Fort Benning, Georgia, to observe American infantry training methods. The visit was routine. NATO allies exchanging doctrine, building relationships, the usual peacetime military tourism. But one of the German officers, a Hauptmann whose name appears only as K in the declassified trip report, asked an unusual question during a briefing on fire support coordination. He wanted to know how American doctrine handled situations where a single enemy combatant required disproportionate resources to neutralize. The American briefer, a major from the infantry school, did not understand the question at first. He asked for clarification. Hauptmann K. explained. In his father's war, German snipers had been suppressed not by counter-snipers, but by artillery and tank fire directed at entire buildings. Was this still American doctrine? The major's response is recorded in the trip report. If it works, we'll use it. 6 words. The German officer reportedly nodded and wrote something in his notebook. The declassified document does not record what. The pattern repeated in Vietnam, where American forces applied the same logic to different terrain. A sniper in a tree line became a problem for artillery. A sniper in a village became a problem for airstrikes. The body counts grew absurd, entire grid squares suppressed to eliminate single shooters, but the calculus remained identical to Brest. American lives cost more than American ammunition. The exchange rate favored overwhelming response. It repeated again in Fallujah in 2004, where Marine snipers found themselves on the other side of the equation for the first time. American precision against insurgent quantity. The results were instructive. When the material advantage flipped, so did the outcomes. But at Brest, in September 1944, the equation ran in only one direction. The Fallschirmjäger had trained for years to become invisible killers. One shot, one kill, then vanish. The Americans had trained for weeks to become logisticians in uniform. Men who understood that the rifle on their shoulder mattered less than the radio on their back, because the radio connected them to an industrial base that could deliver more explosive power in one afternoon than the entire German sniper corps could match in a year of perfect shooting. Detmer called it manufacturing. Brennecke called it irrelevance. Ramke, in the end, called it burial. The after-action report from the 8th Infantry Division called it something else entirely. In the section on ammunition expenditure, there is a line item for 75mm rounds fired during urban operations. The number is 12,437. Next to it, in a column labeled Purpose, someone typed a single word: clearance. The word was not counter-sniper operations, not precision engagement, nothing that acknowledged the existence of individual German soldiers making individual decisions to fire or not fire. Clearance, the same word the Army used for removing rubble from a road.